Thanks. Thanks, Dave. Tonight's speaker is Chanda Smith Baker. Now, Chanda is the president and CEO of Pillsbury United Communities, which is about a 100-year-old social service organization operating out of Minneapolis, but our school's in St. Paul, and they authorize charter schools. Now, in 2006, Wayne Jennings and I talked about me coming over and I interviewed for the job. It wasn't just total nepotism, and not total nepotism. But anyhow, I did have to interview, to come over to take over Jennings, because the director at the time was leaving the country. And I said, okay, yeah. And I came in, and there was going to be a meeting with the authorizer. Well, I was at River Heights. We had a different authorizer. It was Ed Visions, and I knew Doug Thomas. And Chanda comes in, and she looks at me, and she said, this is how the conversation started. I want you to know I've done research on you. And I was like, what? What'd I do? And she said, you check out. Don't worry, you check out okay. And I still don't know how she did the research. But anyhow, I thought, boy, I better make sure she doesn't think I'm some, bad guy or something. But we met, and we can't seem to, I think once this fall we were meeting to what are you going to talk about, that kind of stuff. And the problem is, every time I sit down with Chanda, we don't talk about what we're supposed to meet on. We talk about politics and other things, we get nowhere, we cannot work together just because of that. And anyhow, it's one of the people I respect and admire the most. She's terrific. Please welcome Chanda Smith Baker.
That's funny. That's true, though. He came last time. I think we met for a couple of hours, and I finished. I said, I still don't know what they want me to talk about. But I learned a lot of new things about what was happening at Jennings and what was happening in the charter world and all the people that are out to strip innovation from this work. We talked about the wonderful things that kids contribute every day, which Bill is so great at talking about. I have never met with him where he doesn't give me a story about some student that has impacted him in some way. That he sees the brilliance in them, and he's just awed at, just with the right environment, how they just take off. So I really appreciate your commitment. And those stories are the fuel. Those realities are what fuels the work that we all do. So I'm going to attempt here to read my speech off of my iPad. Let me just get myself situated. So we got kind of a span here. If you can't hear me in the back, just raise your hand and I'll make sure to speak up. And I also want to just thank the organizers of this event for the invitation, for your commitment over the last 30 years to pulling like-minded folks together to have great discussions and have opportunity to talk with each other about what you're doing and what your needs are. I was here last year and did a session, and I just felt very inspired by the conversations that I had individually. And so, again, I appreciate coming back. So as I begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about two things that were relatively significant, and the second that I'm going to share with you really became more of the inspiration for the words that I'm going to talk to you about this evening. So the first thing that I wanted to say is that today is very sentimental to me because my cousin, who passed away on May 11 of 2011, it's his birthday. His name is Christopher Miller, and he lost his life to gun violence. And he was an educator and an activist and just a wonderful person who had gone to school and saw just great benefit to what quality education meant. But his role as a connector in the school, as a dean of students, as the security in the hallway, as the relationship builder in the school, he was just a phenomenal person. And, you know, as Bill mentioned, we can never get together without being just a little bit political. So I'm going to be a little bit political on this. You know, today I stand here in celebration of his life, and I appreciate each of the 27 years he was here. And as we are in a discussion about gun legislation, I wanted to share a few things with you, a few numbers. According to the Children's Defense Fund, 34,387 children were injured by guns in 2008 and 2009, enough to fill more than 1,374 classrooms of 25 students. In those same years, 5,740 students were killed due to gun violence, enough to fill 229 classrooms of 25 students each. We get into debates and sometimes we forget about the real implications of what's at play. And I stand here to say that whether you own a gun or you'll never own a gun, I think it's time for us to take action to make our communities safer. My cousin and other victims of gun violence deserve our vote. As the president so eloquently stated last night to the victims and the parents that were in that room as he gave that State of the Union address, they deserve our vote, they deserve our attention. This is not about taking of rights, it's about protecting the safety of us as individuals. And I just needed a moment today to just talk about that, because it would be such even more of a tragedy for me not to take what my voice is and use it towards what's right. So the second sentimental moment that I'm bringing here today, and one that I told you was really the guide for my comments, is the fact that this is the month of February. It's Black History Month. And you know, it's a special month to me, because it's a time that I can have an opportunity to see more things like me reflected on television, and there's more activities for me to participate in the community. And last year, my big thing about being here in Rochester was the Rosa Parks Convention Center, or I think that's what it's called. And I drove up, and Adair was with me last year, and I'm like, oh my God, there's something here named by Rosa Parks. I mean, I was just too outdone, right? And I couldn't believe how much that mattered to me. And it mattered because it was a reflection of me represented here in Rochester. What an amazing thing. And when I think about what that meant to me, I think a lot about how we're allowing the kids that we're teaching to see reflections of themselves in their history. And so part of coming back to Rochester and speaking to you, I thought about Rosa Parks, and I thought about, okay, well, this is February. And you know, as this month celebrates the rich cultural history and the legacy in which we've all benefited from, I had to recognize that I would not be in the roles that I'm in right now had it not been for the courageous and the boldness and the audacity of people to believe that equal treatment belongs to everyone. In this month, I'm reminded of a person named Rustin Baynard. Has anybody heard of Rustin Baynard? Bill? That's funny. I should have expected that. I didn't actually expect that. So Rustin Baynard is quite an amazing person. And so Rustin was, in the 60s, very instrumental in a number of things that happened in the civil rights movement. And, at the time, and you have to really understand the time, right? So we're in the middle of the civil rights fight. He's, in his 60s or so. He's a gay man. It's like, not really broadly accepted. And, he's just in the midst of a lot of things. And that's the context in which this is in. And yet he was often just welcomed and embraced and had such a tremendous impact despite some of the inequalities that he faced as part of his orientation. And he was behind the scenes. He wasn't the MLK in the front. He was the man that was behind building relationships and talking with people and understanding what was really going on. And so I was introduced to Rustin Baynard in a documentary called The Brother Insider, which is an account of his life and his contributions. So anyway, Rustin Baynard is the strategist behind the March on Washington. And so this march was held 50 years ago. This is 2013, marks the 50th year of that march in Washington. And that march brought an estimated 300,000 people to the mall. And it was one of the largest political rallies in our US history. And it was the notorious "I Had a Dream" speech was delivered there by Martin Luther King. And attendees included, black, white, poor, rich, political, civic leaders, mothers, grandmothers, fathers. It included just a variety, a mix of people. And when you look at the photo, you can, sometimes you see the photo, it's Martin Luther King up front, and you see Coretta, and she's locked arms, and you see the sea of people. And you don't see title, and you don't know their worth, and you don't know what they would be valued at, or anything like that, but you know that they're all there for the same purpose, to make a difference in the world, to fight for rights. And it's just an incredibly amazing thing to me. And so in the video, it raised a question that I don't think I ever thought. How did they all know to be there? How did they get there, right? It's 1963. There's no cell phones. There's no Facebook. There's no Twitter. There's no email. How did that happen that they got there and knew to arrive on that day? And it was, it was one of those moments where it was pivotal to me in my thinking, because that march was really, in my mind, about Martin Luther King, the person out front, creating the energy and making the speech. But the reality is that that speech was about everyday people that showed up because they cared. The relationships it took. It doesn't move unless we engage people at all levels. And so it's just fascinating to me that he was able to do that. And as a result of his organizing efforts and the organizing efforts of others, that he could say, you remember when I came there, I need you to get your people to come here for this reason. And so what his life illustrates to me is a very simple truth, that those on the ground matter. That collective action towards the same end can have a powerful and even history-making result. As we gather this evening as ground workers, I can't resist imagining the power that we have together and the power of our networks. I just can't resist thinking about the debt that I owe to those who sacrificed for me, the obligation I have towards future generation. I can't help that on this month of February, in recognition that had it not been for people dying and fighting and voting, I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing today. I wouldn't have the opportunities that I have today. I feel indebted to that. I feel obligated to figure out what do we do in order for the future generation to have more opportunity. The barriers I see today, I hope to God are not here 30 years from now. And lastly, I can't resist but to think about the hundreds and thousands of students that are in schools today. And the question that keeps coming up for me is, are we doing enough? And I know we're doing a lot, but are we doing enough? And so in the last 30 years that you guys have been meeting and gathering, there's been lots of progress. in policy reforms, and certainly in classrooms and in other spaces and places. But reforms like No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top and some of the Promise Neighborhood works have emerged. School choice legislation, charter school legislation, keep looking at Wayne, have provided choices for parents that did not exist. It's important to acknowledge how far we've come. And what I think we're at is a turning point in education. In recent years, there's been a brighter spotlight on the disparities, a deeper investment from the business community, increased expectation on community leadership and nonprofit leadership. I certainly feel it. The philanthropic community has shifted more explicitly to funding activities that specifically address achievement. There's efforts like Generation Next, which came out of the Strive initiative, which came out of the collective impact in Ohio, where they said, well, what are we measuring the right things? Are our arrows going the right way? And are the schools and community organizations and all the people that say they're doing work for kids, are we all working together in the same way, in the same vein, and in the same understanding? These things are happening, right? Even Hollywood's gotten involved, Waiting for Superman, We Won't Back Down, The Lottery. They're making movies in order to educate the broader community on what's happening in education and what kids are facing and the disparities and what are we going to do when we don't have the educated population that we need in order for this economy to continue to flourish. What are we going to do? And so they begin to raise visibility on issues, and even in this, as the base becomes more educated, we're still operating a little separately. And so I've been thinking quite a bit about that. And when I think about movements, what does it mean to be part of a reform movement? What does it mean to be part of an education movement? And what does it mean to move students? As I reflect on some of my work in this movement, I had to think and recognize my own evolution. And so when I got into this work, I was a single mom of 3, and I lived where I still live today in North Minneapolis. And so I was at a very sensitive place in my life, coming out of a divorce and feeling a bit rocky. And I was working full time, and I had the kids. And at this particular moment, my oldest son was going to go into, he was like in 6th grade, he was going into middle school, and my youngest was going into kindergarten, so I was in the midst of making choices about their schools. And so in the middle of it, I heard about a man called Dr. Fuller. Does anybody know Dr. Howard Fuller? He was a speaker here, a few people up front. If you haven't heard him, you gotta hear him, he's phenomenal. And so Dr. Howard Fuller was a superintendent in Milwaukee. And after he left that role, he said, I have to do more about engaging the Black community in this conversation around education, and I have to do more about reform, and I have to figure out how do we get the kids that are falling through the cracks. And so he's got this amazing organization that he founded called the Black Alliance for Educational Options. And he is a fiery speaker, just completely phenomenal. So the chamber had him in St. Paul, and I went, and I thought, okay, he's talking about school choice. So in my naive parent role, I said, okay, I'm looking for schools, and he's talking about schools to choose, right? That's kind of what I thought. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna hear about schools to choose, and I'm gonna learn some things, and I'm gonna be able to find the school that's right for my daughter, the school that was right for my son. It was really important to me to be able to do that. And so I got there and I learned so much more. And what was the most amazing thing to me was that what I learned that day, the significance of that day for me, and really it was a key defining moment in my life, because what I felt was honored. I felt honored. I felt as a parent, my experience was honored. That what he said was that, parents like you parents that are doing this work, it's so important, parenting and making sure that your kids have the opportunity that they should have. And he just went on and on and on. It wasn't an experience that I'd had the week before in a school setting, where, now let me just lay this out a little bit more for you, because not only was I working full-time and in school full-time, but I was going to school in St. Cloud. So I worked in North Minneapolis, and I had 3 kids, and I'm single, and I drove to St. Cloud at night, drove back home. I did that for 3 years, raising these kids, right? I mean, it literally, some of the professors there know them because they were playing with toys and eating Cheerios in the hallway or in back of classrooms when I couldn't find babysitter. So I have my kid in the school, and I missed the parent night, and so I go to pick her up, and someone pulls me and says, you know, will you come in here? I want to talk to you. So, well, sure, you know, okay. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, you know what I was thinking. I just didn't, you know. So I was thinking that, and so, so I go in there, and so what she said to me was, at this school, our parents are active. I heard some, that's, yeah. At this school, our parents are active. If your child is going to be here, we need you to be here. And so I remember just feeling angry. And like, how dare she choose how I prioritize my time, because I'm doing everything I can to provide for them. I'm doing everything I can to create a positive home, one that recognizes the importance of education. I knew as a single mom, I needed to get my education so that I can encourage them to go to school and I can provide for my kids. And this woman took one day that I didn't come, and she lectured me in front of my child. It was horrible, and I remember it. I remember how I felt. I can feel it in my bones, in my experience. It was not okay. And so when I was in that place with Dr. Fuller, and he's saying, you know, parents have the right, you know, you have the right to choose, and you have the right to have your kids in environments that work. It was validating to me. I hadn't had that experience, right? I'm black, I live in 55411, North Minneapolis, the home of the disparity, right? Like all of the things that get stereotyped and broad brushed, right? I walk in there, they don't know who I am, they just know who they think I am, and here they go painting their little brush all over me. And you know what was the worst thing about that day is that I allowed it. I internalized what I saw from her. And I learned. And I got addicted to this stuff. You know, some of you all, you guys in the front, you two in the front know that I started, really getting to know Dr. Fuller, and he invited me to the next thing. And then I went to, some schools, and over the last 11 or 12 years since then, I've been to many schools across the country, high-performing schools, low-income kids, kids of color, that are doing some wonderful things. I've been a charter authorizer, as Bill mentioned, working for the same organization, but directly working with charter schools. I led a parent organizing effort. I've ran for the Minneapolis School Board. I've been in countless meetings, efforts, task teams since that point. And it was one interaction with one man who made me feel like I had a right, that I had power in this place. In this world that I was living in, I had power. And it was just a transformative thing. And something that I hope that, the story in some way has you see the importance of just small conversations. And sometimes when you're saying things, you don't know if you're impacting someone with the brush, or are you impacting someone and giving them the power to move forward? Words and actions are so important. And so as I was thinking through my comments, and I'm thinking about the civil rights movement and what those individuals did on my behalf, and I think about what Howard Fuller has done on my behalf, and what this led me to think about is why am I still in this after 11 years or 12 years, and why do I continue to be passionate about education and what it offers some of our most struggling kids, the kids that we all work with. And what I ultimately realized is that regardless of whatever title I may have held or hold now, that at the end of the day, I'm still a mom. I'm still just a mom, right? I'm still a mother that wants the best for my children and for the community's children. As I've matured in this work, I realized that I may have gotten into this because of parental choice, but I stay in this work because of the aspirational goals of this. The aspirational opportunity, the larger picture is that if we ever actualize what we're trying to do, if we ever close this gap, if we ever reach all of the kids that are struggling, that we're changing lives, we're changing communities, and we're going to change this country. That is a big deal. And I feel so honored to be in this room as we all are on the ground fighting towards that bigger aspirational goal. And so even if you're not in front and you don't want to march to Washington and all the things that I imagine doing, you know, it still matters what you do in your classrooms. It still matters what you do and how you lead and how you hold people accountable and how you raise that bar and how we continue as a group to innovate and inspire and move towards that end. And so, obviously, when you reflect on these things, I can say, well, we have made such great gains in these years, and 30 years and counting. And I was sharing with Bill, you know, I'm like 30 years and counting, and I figured that it was for MAAP. And then I'm thinking, you know, how many years since the charter school movement? And then it's like, well, how many years since Brown v. Wade? And, you know, like, how many years have we been evolving here in terms of education? And it's been a long time. And what is perplexing is that these disparities still exist. And that while we've made gains, it's just simply not enough. We have to do more. So about a week ago, I was talking with a friend, and I shared with him my Howard Fuller story, and I shared with him the story that I shared with you about that person in that office that day when I was with my daughter. And shared, you know, kind of the personal attack that I felt. And the question that he asked me was, so how does your work today value and validate parents? And, you know, it was a question I don't often get stumped or completely stumped. And, you know, I kind of humbly stand before you today to say that it really caused me to pause to say, how am I making sure that I'm staying connected to the voices I need to stay connected to in order to know that the efforts I'm making are right? And when we talk about charter schools, when we talk about alternative learning, when we talk about reform, when we talk about what's happening right now, we talk about it as a movement. Right? Like, we're in this movement. And what I realized, just like, you know, and I'm thinking about Rustin Baynard, and I'm like, you know, he was talking to people. He's on the ground. He's like leading, and he's on the ground, and with this incredible mix of things. And when I think about the movements that have happened in this country, the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, the LGBT movement, all these things had in common were the diversity of people at the table. So the question in our work is, are we intentionally being inclusive? Are we being inclusive? And here I am, right? I'm so committed to social justice, right? I'm so about it being inclusive and equity and all these great things. And what I discovered in this work is that I am not always including the voices that need to be at the table. I'm not always thinking when I'm meeting with groups, who's not here, who's not represented. How do you know what you're saying is true for this group of people? How do you know? How do you know? How do you include? How do you set the table so that people feel comfortable sharing? And this is, you know, what I find in this work is that we're including the voice of the kids at one level, but we're not elevating the voice of parents and kids in other levels. And I'm challenged today to think through that, and I hope that I have you at least have a pause and say, you know, when you're designing things and thinking through things, are you being inclusive? Are we being inclusive enough? Is our table set the right way for the type of movement that we need in order to make the kind of gains that are necessary? I thought of another person, and they both coincidentally were keynote speakers here, and the other one was Jonathan Kozel. And this quote that he said, "I have been criticized throughout the course of my career for placing too much faith in the reliability of the child's narrative. But I've almost always found that children are a great deal more reliable in telling us exactly what goes on in public schools than many of the adult experts who develop policy that shape their destiny." And it just really just kind of took everything that I was feeling and just brought it in. And as Bill always does so great, is that he brings these stories up in ways that aren't just him running off stories, but that it's him, he's chuckling down here, but it's him really making a bigger point through stories. It's making a bigger point. And I'm just encouraging you, because this work is not easy work. We are all working hard. We're all working hard. And some days it feels like we're not making the type of progress that we need. But I can tell you that those stories, as we call them at Pillsbury, the mission moments, those matter. They matter to think through them and understand that, while we may not be making large strides as quickly as I would like to see anyway, or as maybe some of the kids need to see, we're certainly making a difference. So the other thing for me, and maybe I want to actually provide a little bit of a background about Pillsbury United Communities. So Pillsbury United Communities, where I'm the CEO, came out of, it was founded in 1879, and it came from the settlement movement. And the settlement movement, the settlement house movement, founded really in London, in Toynbee Hall. And what this was really people with means settling into communities where people were disenfranchised. And it was not like, I'm gonna come save you, but it was more like, I'm gonna come and help you, and you're gonna help me, and we're gonna create community spaces for you to connect together to discuss what your community needs in order to move forward, and that I have information that you may need in terms of figuring out how to navigate systems. So it was very much kind of this organic grassroots movement of organizing. And today we operate 5 neighborhood centers across Minneapolis. And a lot of our work is evolving to be very much what I'm talking about today. And we are getting better and better about it. We're thinking about adding a youth council, for example, or a junior board of directors. So I have my board of directors I report to. So I'm thinking about a junior board of young people that can advise me in my role and make real governing decisions and help me think through large issues, because I value their thought process, and I know that because I'm not in that group, I have a blind spot to it. And so what's phenomenal is some of the things that have come up, and I'm gonna give you an example, and hopefully it provides some encouragement. A few years back in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, there were young Somali kids that were experiencing, they were having lots of issues in that neighborhood, primarily with the police. And if you remember, does anybody remember when Somali boys were disappearing and it was on the news? Does anybody remember that? Got a few hands there. And so that neighborhood was kind of right in the middle of where our neighborhood center operates, our community house. And there's not kind of other real gathering spaces, and so we often get called on for these issues. So if you can imagine, you've got these issues of kids disappearing, you've got this heightened sensitivity, heightened discriminatory thing going on against Muslims in this community. You've got adults that aren't speaking English to understand some of the things that are happening and the expectations, and it's just kind of all coming to a pivotal point of it. It could either go really bad or it's got to get better. I mean, there's nothing around it. And in the middle of this, there were some shootings that were happening, and it was just kind of a hot mess, if you want to say it that way, because you don't really know which way to go. You didn't know. Do you run after the kids that are missing? Do you run after the people that are getting attacked? And in the middle of it, the police are trying to keep the other business owners safe and comfortable, so they were literally driving up in these vans and just sweeping the neighborhood, and they were just taking kids and just sweeping them to make sure that they were at least perceiving the safety in the community. So what happened is that one of our school, or our neighborhood center directors, Jennifer Blevins, decided to gather the kids, and they started this youth council, and she said, you know, if it was your problem to solve, how would you solve this? So the kids said, well, I would make sure that kids had jobs. And so she said, okay, so what does that look like? And I'm fast forwarding because it was a process, but ultimately what they came up with was a coffee cart. They wanted to start a coffee cart. And I would not have thought that. I would have never thought it, not once, not at all. And I still didn't get it when they thought it. But what happened is that what their thoughts were, their process was, is that the Somali elders were meeting at a Starbucks not too far from the neighborhood center. And what they thought is that if they brought a coffee cart into the neighborhood center, it would create an opportunity for the adults in the community to interact with the kids if they placed it outside of the gym. And that the kids could feel something to feel proud about every time they walked in the building, because they would know that they were part of a business that was started, and then they could get job skill and earn the opportunity to work at the coffee cart and make money if they didn't get in trouble. Just an incredibly amazing thing that they were able to then partner with Augsburg, raise the money, and it gets better for me because they said, well, we need to understand what's going on with coffee and fair trade and all this stuff. So then they wanted to go and see what that looked like. So then they took a trip to Guatemala, and they're in the mountains, and they're understanding about free trade coffee, and they're doing it, and then they want to bring it back, and then they only want coffee that doesn't keep people in poverty, and it's empowering, and we're not hurting or damaging people or countries as a result of the coffee that we're serving. How did we go from Somali kids disappearing to a coffee cart in Guatemala? Right? Could have never thunk it, would have never thought it, would have never got there. And so what it did is it opened up an opportunity for our organization to realize that as long as our history has been, 1879, that we were still learning, we were still in the midst of learning, and that as long as we maintained the openness to that, as long as we were available to these young people, in the way that we were still doing the work in which we were founded. We weren't founded to provide service. We weren't founded to just do social work. We were founded to build community and to solve issues and to be a support system and a thought partner and a place of safety. And that sometimes in the midst of the work, we forgot that. We forgot to have the relationships because we got our funder checklist. And so, my question today really is one, and maybe your experiences aren't like mine. That's quite possible. And I know that you guys are working in small school communities, and what I'm thinking through is really my role as a leader at Pillsbury United Communities, and my role as educational activist. I'm thinking about that role, and I'm thinking about the totality of what we can all do together if we were listening and providing opportunities for young people and parents to bring their voices to the table. There are so many opportunities, whether or not it's politically or at school board meetings or at a neighbor's house or tutoring kids, that we all contribute to this grand plan of getting all kids highly educated in this state. As I continue to understand my role in social justice, really my question that I have, and I'm going to leave you with, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A, is and my challenge is to just look around, and I can look in here, and I look in other rooms, and sometimes there's more women, and sometimes there's no men, or sometimes everyone's the same age, and sometimes it's all white, and sometimes it's all black, but it's never a good mix. It's never a balanced mixture of people. And it's curious to me, and I'm just challenging you, because the table of tomorrow will look dramatically different. I can imagine in your various communities you're seeing some differences. And what I want you to understand is that As these tables change, it's important for us to make the invitation. It's equally as important for us to change how the table works and functions. Right? Because a big piece of what we do is we're navigating for students and we're navigating for community. But if you invite people to the table that operates the same way, they won't stay. And when I was thinking about Rustin Boehner, and I shared this with Adair, I said, how traumatic is it that you've got poor disenfranchised people that figured out how to get to DC on no money? Like, how do you get that many poor people to DC? Like, I mean, it took a tremendous sacrifice of neighbors or whatever. And I said, you know, this is a point that may go too far, but I'm saying, is that I'm in a lot of school buildings where they said, we can't get parents to come to meetings. And I think, well, how do you get 300,000? I mean, certainly there's a larger mission, but my point is that it was the relationship that got them there. It was the relationships that got them there. It was the realization that in order for this to work the way it needs to work, I need you, and I need you, and I need you, and it won't be the same if you're not there. There was something about his ability to do that and mean it, right? Because it's really authentic. That's who he is, and that's who I am. I know this, right? That's who he is. And so, when we talk about when we're having things at school and people aren't showing up, I don't know if it's just them. I don't know if they're just too busy. I don't know if it's just they're working 2 jobs. I don't know if it's just that they're in school. I don't know if it's just all of the barriers that sometimes we describe on why parents and kids don't show up to things. I'm not convinced of that. But I am thinking through, if we valued relationships more, and if we listened better, and if we rolled up that collective knowledge that we have in this room into solutions where people see themselves as a part of it, would people show up differently? Would they be inspired to act differently? Would they be coming to those meetings? I mean, all of this to me has been a very, I've been on this exploration, I guess, in my mind, and it's something about the title of this conference, 30 Years and Beyond, and innovation, and all these things, and this month for me, and saying, in my community, and what does 30 years mean, right? Because you can look at 30 years of reform, and I know that we're talking about this organization in 30 years, and sometimes we hear, words about how long the charter school movement or the school reform movement has been happening. And then I think about, it's been different in my experience as an African-American woman, what I see the evolution of education has been. And if I was from Somalia, it would look completely different because I wouldn't know what it looked like 30 years ago necessarily in this country. And if I was Hmong, it would be different. And so sometimes we start having language that we think is commonly understood and descriptors that we think are commonly understood, and they're not always that. And so I want to lead, and I know that I'm taking you down this journey of, and I hope it's, how do we make sure that we're being inclusive? How do we bring these voices up? That as I'm exploring this, as I'm challenging myself to be better about it, I hope that you go back and think about who's at your table, who's not at your table, and what can I do? And if you're in communities, or if you don't have, what does it look like to include a variety of voices in your experience? What additional efforts or steps might you want to take? So I'll have one more quote for you as I close, and it's, Martin Luther King Jr. quote that just says that it would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. And I feel a sense of urgency for the children in this community, and I can gather from your attendance here that you do as well. I appreciate your time, and I'm more than welcome to take some questions. Feel like, who was the guy that was on Twitter with the water last night after you guys? Marco Rubio. He was on a press conference and he grabbed some water or something. I don't know. It ended up being big news today, so I had a flashback on that. So I'm more than willing to take questions if you have them.
Can you tell us about the choices you made for your kids?
I will. So, will I tell the audience about the choices I made for my kids? Yes. So what happened is I became the parental choice calendar girl. And so what I did is I had so I have 5 kids now. And so my 2 oldest went to Harvest Prep. So my oldest went to Harvest Prep. He went to Breck. And then he graduated from Cooper. My next child went to Harvest Prep until 3rd grade. He went to Fair School, which is an inter-district collaboration. Then he went to Cooper. They had one school in the middle that didn't work out, which was what they would call a Choice is Yours school. And then they went to Cooper in Robbinsdale. My daughter started out in Minneapolis public school, then she went to a charter school, and now she's in a Minneapolis district school. And then my 2 youngest have only been in charter. They started out in charter, now they're in NPS. So I've been, let's see, district, out of district, charter, private, parent. And I was sharing with the dear on the right here that at one point I had a kid at Harvest, I had a child at Breck, I had one at Kenwood, and maybe one at a charter school or something like that. And I parented differently at each school. And it was a really interesting experience because I had my school that I felt very comfortable in community. And then the school that we were out of district, we're coming from North Minneapolis, and so you kind of, some of it I brought to the table. I recognize I brought some things to the table with that. But I kind of felt like parents and people were like, here they go busing their kids into my school to mess it up, And then I'm at Breck and I'm thinking, they're certainly looking at me like, scholarship, or whatever the case may be. And so it was just a really interesting kind of comparison of experience as a parent.
Explain again what helped you feel empowered. I definitely understand what helped you feel discouraged being, a part of the school. But what again brought that back to make you feel empowered?
From Dr. Fuller?
Can you explain that again?
Yeah, well, Howard has this amazing, Dr. Fuller. So the question was, explain to me what I felt about being powered, and I think sometimes when we talk to audiences about schools, we're talking about either parents in a negative way, we have to figure out how to parent parents, we have to figure out how to educate them and to get them what they need, and certainly when they can't, they can't think through where they're gonna live and what they're gonna eat, they can't pay attention to this. There's a lot of that kind of language that goes on that really doesn't see them as an asset, but sees them as a deficit and a barrier to why the school can't move forward. And what Dr. Fuller did for me that day, and then sometimes we talk about policy or we talk about things at a bigger, broader level, right? Like the school movement or the disparities, you're talking to parents about educational disparities. And I don't care about educational disparities. I didn't care about that then. What I cared about is my child's experience in school. And so it just was a little bit too big for me at the time. And so what Howard did so well was that he talked about parents. We need parents. We need the experience of parents to be told, and we need the experience of kids to be told, because this is what matters. This is how we make decisions. This is what, it's the work on the ground that matters. And he just kind of framed it in a way that it personalized it and took it less out of the sky for me, and it was just at the right moment of me selecting things. And like I mentioned, and it attached it to, I'm not the only one struggling to about making the right decisions for my children. There's actually something called the parental choice movement. I'm in a movement, I didn't even know. Right? I'm not just choosing schools, I'm in a movement, So that's kind of what it did for me. I know someone who sat in the back has a question, right? No? Nope, I got one over there.
line to go where you saw where their talents were, or that school was right for that child? Why were they in so many different settings?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why were my kids in so many settings? Did I choose it or did they choose it? It was kind of a combination. So my boys are in sets, kind of, so I have 4 boys and a girl. So my 2 older boys, they're 2 years apart. My 2 younger are 2 years apart. So when my sons were in my older set were in the same school. My younger one of that set came to me and he said, I do not want to go to school with him anymore. I'm tired of being his little brother and I can never really do what I need to do. And so he was just like on repeat for about a month. And then I made the decision to move him and I think that was a good choice. So they actually spent, they didn't come back together until about mid-high school. And I think that was an excellent choice. My 2 younger are kind of in that now. I'm less ambitious now with all of the schools. I'm trying to narrow it down because the other thing is that, so my oldest son is, he'll be 20. In his whole school experience, I drove him to and from school every day, or my mother or somebody did. And so I just can't, with my schedule, do that anymore. So that has a factor in it. So that's where my choice came in, just the feasibility of it. But I did listen to them, and I have one child who's he needs structure or he's all over the place. I have another one, if you give him structure, he's gonna fight you every step of the way. My daughter is the most flower, she's just kind of the flower child, the free spirit, the little activist. And so I had to find a place that appreciates her. We're still in search. She needs a little bit of appreciation. I can give you a quick example of Elon, my daughter. She's mad at Michelle Obama because of the healthy meals situation that's going on. And so they're giving the kids in middle school 4 chicken nuggets and a pack of ketchup. And they took away chocolate milk, which has completely ticked her off. And so here we go into this year, and it was an election year, and she's mad, and she's writing letters to Washington on this. And she's taking pictures of lunch every day and tweeting it and Facebooking it, and then getting her friends to do it and talk about how hungry they are. And so that's her, and so you have to appreciate her. I got more.
Oh, there's another one.
I have no idea how to ask this question, sort of politically correct or whatever, but when you talk about does everyone have a place at the table, that really speaks to me because I work at St. Cloud, and I don't think in 12 years of working at the ALC there I've ever very successfully connected with African American parents. And I mean, I'm not sure if they would say that. I think they've tolerated me and they mostly haven't hated me. But I don't think I've known their actions. I don't think I've known what they would really say about what our schools should do or the kinds of things you're talking about. And I don't really have any idea what I would do differently to
do that. Yeah. St. Cloud is an interesting place. It feels like I feel the change there. I spoke there a couple of weeks ago on the campus, and I certainly feel the change on the campus. And it's a changing community in terms of the makeup. And what I would recommend is finding a way to either get their voice heard, because surveys actually do matter, because it's like someone took the time to ask some thoughtful questions. And I can provide real answers, true, what's my truth, in a way that doesn't allow me to feel like I can be in some sort of, have a consequence for my message. So that's, I think, important. And, you have some pretty visible and formal type leaders in the community. And so sometimes what you have to do is you have to send someone else to begin to break that down. So if those parents have someone mutual to you, that you see that they trust. Begin to build the relationship through them until you can get to them directly. I don't know kind of enough, but I mean, there's other things in terms of the type of materials you send home. You know, if you're thinking about diversity in curriculum, you know, I mean, there's like little small things that show that you're being thoughtful about making sure that the kids are seeing themselves reflected, that parents pick up on. And it begins to just break it down a little. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. That's okay, yep. Bill doesn't want to cut it off, and I don't want to stand here too long without a hand up, so I'm in a dilemma.
Gotta give us up. Thank you, Chanda. We have a tradition at MAAP that most of our keynote speakers are from out of state. So we have a native homegrown Minnesota. But we usually give them a Minnesota packet, but you know these products. Cheerios, salt and nut roll, Scotch tape from 3M, wild rice. I didn't know what was in here, so I'm Post-it notes also from 3M. Nut Goody from Pearson's factory in St. Paul. And the best for last, Spam from Austin, Minnesota.
I'm glad that he explained that. And I got back to the room, what's the deal with these people? So anyway, thank you so much, and I'll be around, thanks.